Why do we stumble, again and again, into the same thorny patches of our romantic lives? It is a question that echoes through the private chambers of heartache and the public forums of shared human experience. We vow, with the sting of the last disappointment still fresh, that next time will be different. Yet, for so many, that next time bears an uncanny, almost theatrical resemblance to the last. The faces may change, the settings may shift, but the underlying script of dissatisfaction, of miscommunication, of an aching void, often remains stubbornly, tragically the same. Is this mere coincidence, a cruel lottery of love where some are perpetually unlucky? Or is there a deeper, more intricate mechanism at play, a hidden director orchestrating these recurring dramas from the shadows of our own minds? The dominant narratives of modern romance often point outwards, to a lack of suitable partners, to the complexities of contemporary dating, or even to the nebulous concept of bad luck. But what if the most profound, most persistent saboteur of our relational happiness lies not in the external world, nor in the stars, but deep within the architecture of our own psyche, a relic of a past we believe we have outgrown but which continues to cast an astonishingly long shadow? This exploration delves into that disquieting possibility, proposing that the fatal mistake we commit in relationships is not a singular, identifiable error, but rather an unconscious compulsion to repeat, a pattern woven into the very fabric of our being by the formative experiences of our earliest years, a concept meticulously charted by Sigmund Freud and one that continues to offer profound, if unsettling, insights into the human heart's most perplexing entanglements. To understand this fatal mistake is to embark on a journey into the Freudian unconscious, to confront the ghosts of our personal history, and to question the very nature of what we believe we seek in love. The notion that our adult relationships are, in essence, replays of earlier, unresolved dramas is a cornerstone of Freudian thought, a concept that challenges the romantic ideal of love as a purely spontaneous, present-tense phenomenon. Freud, in his relentless excavation of the human mind, identified a powerful, often unconscious, force he termed the repetition compulsion, Wiederholungszwang. This is not simply a tendency to repeat behaviors, but a more profound drive to reenact earlier experiences, particularly those that were traumatic, overwhelming, or emotionally significant, in a desperate, albeit unconscious, attempt to master them. Imagine a child who experienced emotional neglect. As an adult, they might find themselves repeatedly drawn to partners who are emotionally unavailable, distant, or critical. On a conscious level, this individual might yearn for warmth, intimacy, and validation. They might actively seek partners who seem to promise these qualities. Yet, time and again, they find themselves in dynamics that mirror the very deprivation they suffered in childhood. Why would the psyche, seemingly in pursuit of happiness and fulfillment, steer us towards such familiar pain? Freud's answer is complex. It is not a desire for pain itself, but an attempt to rewrite an old script, to finally achieve a different outcome, to gain a sense of control over a situation that once rendered us helpless. The fatal mistake, then, is the misrecognition of this repetition. It is the failure to see that the allure of a particular person or dynamic is not necessarily a sign of genuine compatibility or future happiness, but rather the siren call of the familiar, the unconscious pull towards a scenario where an old wound can be reopened, re-experienced, and, hopefully, this time, healed. This is a gamble the unconscious is perpetually willing to make, often at the expense of our conscious desires and well-being. The chemistry we feel, that intense, inexplicable pull towards another, can sometimes be the psychic equivalent of recognizing a fellow actor in a long-running, unacknowledged play from our past. The historical roots of this understanding of relational patterns lie in Freud's clinical observations and his evolving theories of the mind. Initially, Freud's work focused on the pleasure principle, the idea that the psyche seeks pleasure and avoids pain. However, his encounters with patients suffering from war neurosis, what we would now call PTSD, who repeatedly relived their traumatic experiences in nightmares and flashbacks, and his observations of children's play, where they would often reenact frightening or unpleasant events, led him to posit something beyond the pleasure principle. This was the repetition compulsion, a force that seemed to operate independently of, and sometimes in direct opposition to, the pursuit of pleasure. In his 1920 essay, Beyond the Pleasure Principle, Freud explored this phenomenon, linking it tentatively to what he would later develop as the death drive, Todestrieb, an innate tendency towards inertia, dissolution, and a return to an inorganic state, counterbalanced by the life drives, eros, which strive for connection, creation, and preservation. While the death drive concept remains one of the most debated aspects of Freudian theory, the clinical reality of the repetition compulsion is widely acknowledged. In the context of relationships, it suggests that our choices are not always guided by a rational assessment of what is good for us. Instead, we are often driven by this deeper, more archaic need to repeat, to work through, to somehow resolve the unfinished business of our past. The early family environment, with its intense emotional bonds, power dynamics, and formative experiences of love, loss, rivalry, and dependency, becomes the primary template. The relationship with parents, siblings, and other significant caregivers lays down the fundamental tracks upon which our later relational trains will run. If these early experiences were characterized by insecurity, inconsistency, enmeshment, or trauma, these patterns become deeply ingrained, forming the unconscious blueprint for what feels normal or familiar in a relationship, even if that familiarity is fraught with pain. One of the most insidious aspects of these Freudian patterns is how they disguise themselves as natural or inevitable, thereby evading conscious scrutiny and perpetuating their cycle. We develop narratives: I just have a type, all the good ones are taken, relationships are just hard work, often used to justify enduring unhealthy dynamics, or this is just how love is. These seemingly innocuous statements can be sophisticated defense mechanisms, rationalizations that protect us from the anxiety of confronting the deeper, unconscious reasons for our choices. The feeling of intense familiarity with a new partner, often mistaken for the fabled soulmate connection, can be a prime example of the repetition compulsion at work. This person may, in subtle or overt ways, resemble a key figure from our past, a parent, for instance, embodying both their cherished qualities and their most damaging traits. The unconscious, recognizing this familiar constellation of characteristics, feels an irresistible pull, not necessarily because this person will make us happy, but because they offer the opportunity to re-engage with an old, unresolved conflict. Consider the individual who had a demanding, critical parent and now finds themselves repeatedly attracted to partners who are similarly exacting and difficult to please. Consciously, they may complain about their partner's behavior, yet they may also feel a strange sense of purpose or validation in trying to win their approval, a quest that mirrors their childhood efforts to gain parental acceptance. This dynamic feels natural because it is deeply, historically ingrained. It is the emotional air they breathed for years. To choose a partner who is genuinely supportive, accepting, and easygoing might, paradoxically, feel alien, uncomfortable, or even boring to the unconscious, as it offers no stage for the familiar drama to unfold. The inevitability of these patterns is further reinforced by societal and cultural scripts that often romanticize struggle, jealousy, or intense, tumultuous passion, inadvertently validating the reenactment of unhealthy dynamics. Art and media, for instance, frequently portray love as a battlefield, a source of profound suffering as much as joy, which can normalize and even glamorize the very patterns Freud sought to decode as symptoms of unresolved inner conflict. The impact of these unconsciously driven relational patterns on individual and collective autonomy can be profoundly disempowering. On an individual level, being caught in a cycle of repetition limits one's capacity for genuine choice and growth. If our romantic selections are largely dictated by unresolved childhood issues, then we are not truly free to choose partners who align with our adult values and needs. Instead, we are, in a sense, prisoners of our past, destined to repeat the same mistakes, experience the same heartaches, and reinforce the same limiting beliefs about ourselves and about relationships. This can lead to a pervasive sense of helplessness, a feeling that one is simply unlucky in love or inherently flawed. The energy that could be directed towards building healthy, fulfilling connections is instead consumed by the exhausting process of reenacting and attempting to resolve old dramas. Self-esteem erodes as each failed relationship seems to confirm negative self-perceptions that were often internalized in childhood: I am unlovable, I am not good enough, I will always be abandoned. This erosion of autonomy extends beyond romantic life, potentially affecting friendships, career choices, and overall life satisfaction, as the core beliefs and relational styles forged in these repetitive patterns tend to permeate all areas of interaction. Collectively, the prevalence of these unconscious patterns contributes to broader societal issues. Dysfunctional relationship models can be passed down through generations, creating cycles of trauma and emotional wounding. The normalization of unhealthy dynamics in media and culture, as previously mentioned, can make it harder for individuals to recognize and challenge their own patterns. Furthermore, a society composed of individuals struggling with unresolved personal conflicts may find it more difficult to foster healthy, empathetic, and cooperative communities. The collective capacity for secure attachment and mutual respect can be diminished when a significant portion of its members are unconsciously playing out scripts of distrust, control, or emotional unavailability. The illusion of choice, particularly in the age of digital dating where options seem limitless, can paradoxically mask a deeper lack of true agency, as the underlying unconscious filters remain firmly in place, guiding selections towards the familiar rather than the truly compatible or growth-oriented. The crucial question, then, is how to begin dismantling these deeply entrenched patterns and reclaiming a sense of agency in our relational lives. Freud's answer, and the foundation of psychoanalytic therapy, lies in the arduous but ultimately liberating process of making the unconscious conscious. This is not a simple matter of intellectual understanding. One cannot simply read about the Oedipus complex or the repetition compulsion and be instantly cured. Rather, it involves a deep, experiential exploration of one's personal history, typically facilitated by a therapeutic relationship where these patterns can be safely identified, understood, and worked through. The first step is often the development of self-awareness, the ability to observe one's own feelings, thoughts, and behaviors in relationships with a new, more critical eye. Why am I so intensely drawn to this person? What feelings does this dynamic evoke in me, and where have I felt them before? What expectations, spoken or unspoken, do I bring into my relationships, and from where do they originate? This process of introspection can be painful, as it often involves confronting uncomfortable truths about oneself and one's upbringing. It requires a willingness to look beyond the surface-level attributions of blame, "my ex was a narcissist," and to explore one's own contribution to the recurring dynamics. A generic illustrative case might be someone who consistently finds themselves in relationships where they feel taken for granted and unappreciated, doing most of the emotional labor. Through therapy, they might uncover a childhood where they were the good child, always trying to please an overwhelmed or emotionally distant parent, learning that their value lay in their utility and their ability to anticipate and meet the needs of others, often at the expense of their own. Their fatal mistake is to unconsciously select partners who require this kind of caretaking, and to fall into the familiar role of the overgiver, hoping that this time, their efforts will finally be recognized and reciprocated in the way they always longed for. The strategy for dismantling this involves recognizing this pattern, grieving the childhood unmet needs, and consciously learning to set boundaries, to value their own needs, and to choose partners who are capable of reciprocity rather than those who trigger the old caretaking script. The dynamic that maintains the power of these repetitive patterns is multifaceted. Firstly, there is the inherent nature of the unconscious. It operates outside our awareness, making its influence difficult to detect and challenge. Secondly, defense mechanisms, such as denial, rationalization, and projection, work diligently to protect us from the anxiety that would arise from confronting the true sources of our relational difficulties. It is often less painful to believe that the problem lies with the other person or with external circumstances than to acknowledge our own deeply ingrained patterns. Thirdly, the emotional intensity that often accompanies these reenactments can be mistaken for profound love or connection. The roller coaster of breaking up and making up, the drama of jealousy and reconciliation, can feel incredibly potent, especially if one's early experiences of attachment were also characterized by instability or intensity. This trauma bond can be incredibly difficult to break, as the periods of calm or affection feel like immense rewards after the storm, reinforcing the cycle. Furthermore, society often provides insufficient models for what truly healthy, secure attachment looks like, making it harder to aspire to something different if one has never experienced or witnessed it. The context in which these patterns arose is, as discussed, early life. The hidden dynamic maintaining them is this complex interplay of unconscious drive, defensive maneuvers, the addictive quality of emotional intensity, and a lack of alternative relational blueprints. To dismantle their effects, beyond individual therapy, involves a broader cultural shift towards promoting emotional literacy, destigmatizing the seeking of psychological help, and fostering narratives that value secure, stable, and mutually respectful relationships over dramatic, conflict-ridden ones. It requires cultivating what Daniel Siegel calls mind sight, the ability to see our own minds and the minds of others, fostering empathy and understanding that can break intergenerational cycles of relational dysfunction. Unexpected connections can further illuminate the pervasive nature of these Freudian relational traps. Consider the world of art and literature, which is replete with characters caught in tragic, repetitive love stories. From Anna Karenina's destructive passion to Heathcliff's consuming obsession, these narratives resonate not just because they are dramatic, but because they tap into a universal human experience of being ensnared by forces beyond our conscious control. These artistic representations can serve as both a mirror, reflecting our own potential for self-sabotage, and a cautionary tale. In the realm of technology, the rise of dating apps presents a fascinating modern stage for these ancient dramas. While promising unprecedented choice, the algorithms that match us and the rapid-fire nature of swiping can paradoxically reinforce superficial judgments and allow unconscious biases to operate with even greater efficiency. One might scroll through hundreds of profiles, yet still be drawn to the subtle cues that signal a familiar, albeit potentially problematic, dynamic. The illusion of endless options can make it harder to commit to the difficult work of self-reflection, as the next perfect match seems just a swipe away. Even in biology, we see echoes. Attachment theory, pioneered by John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth, while distinct from Freudian psychoanalysis, complements it by demonstrating how early bonding experiences with caregivers create internal working models of relationships that profoundly influence our expectations and behaviors in adult love. These models, rooted in our biological need for connection and safety, can become rigid, leading us to seek out or recreate the conditions of our earliest attachments, for better or worse. There's even a burgeoning field of epigenetics suggesting that traumatic experiences can leave a chemical mark on a person's genes, which can then be passed down to subsequent generations. This doesn't mean we inherit specific memories of relationships, but perhaps a predisposition or sensitivity to certain kinds of relational stress, adding another layer to the fated feeling that can accompany these repetitive patterns. The journey towards breaking free from these Freudian traps is not about achieving a mythical state of perfect relational bliss, nor is it about blaming our parents or our past. It is, rather, about cultivating a deeper, more compassionate understanding of ourselves and the forces that have shaped us. It is about recognizing that the fatal mistake is not a character flaw but a learned, albeit unconscious, strategy for dealing with early emotional realities. The path to transformation involves several key elements. Firstly, courage, the courage to look inward, to confront painful truths, and to acknowledge one's own role in recurring patterns. This often means stepping outside the comfort zone of familiar suffering and daring to imagine, and then create, something different. Secondly, commitment, the commitment to a process of growth and self-discovery, which may involve therapy, dedicated self-reflection, or other practices that foster emotional insight. Change rarely happens overnight. It is a gradual unfolding, a patient untangling of deeply woven threads. Thirdly, compassion for oneself, for the child within who developed these coping mechanisms in order to survive, and often, compassion for the figures from our past who may have been caught in their own repetitive cycles. Blame is a dead end, understanding opens doors. This self-compassion is crucial, as the process of uncovering these patterns can evoke shame or self-criticism, which are counterproductive to healing. Instead, the aim is to approach one's own psyche with the curiosity and kindness one might offer a dear friend. Practically, this transformation involves learning to pause before plunging into new relationships or reacting in old ways within existing ones. It means developing the capacity to tolerate the anxiety of the unfamiliar, to resist the seductive pull of the same old story. It involves consciously identifying one's core needs and values in a relationship, rather than being driven solely by unconscious chemistry or the desire to fix or be fixed. This might mean choosing a partner who feels less intensely familiar, perhaps even a little boring, to the part of us that craves drama, but who offers stability, kindness, and genuine respect. It involves learning new relational skills, assertive communication, boundary setting, and the ability to self-soothe rather than seeking external validation to manage internal anxieties. A key Freudian insight here is the concept of working through Durchbeten. It's not enough to have an intellectual aha moment. The insights gained must be repeatedly applied and integrated into real-life relational experiences. There will be setbacks, moments when old patterns reassert themselves. The goal is not perfection, but progress, a gradual shifting of the internal landscape so that new, healthier ways of relating become more natural, more deeply ingrained than the old, destructive scripts. This working through is akin to strengthening a new muscle. It requires consistent effort and practice. It also involves grieving the idealized relationships we may never have, grieving the childhoods we can't change, and grieving the parts of ourselves that were shaped by those early experiences. This grief, paradoxically, is what allows us to move forward, unburdened by the ghosts of unmet needs. In conclusion, the fatal mistake we commit in relationships, viewed through a Freudian lens, is the unconscious compulsion to reenact unresolved conflicts and relational dynamics from our early history. It is a tragic misdirection of our innate drive for connection and mastery, leading us to seek familiar pain under the guise of love, to choose partners and dynamics that resonate with old wounds rather than those that foster genuine growth and happiness. This is not a conscious choice, but the powerful working of an unconscious script, written in the language of our earliest attachments, anxieties, and longings. The echoes of Freud's consulting room, where he first began to map these hidden territories of the human heart, still resonate today, urging us to look beyond the surface of our romantic entanglements and into the depths of our own psyches. To dismantle these patterns is to embark on a journey of profound self-discovery, to make the unconscious conscious, to understand the historical roots of our relational templates, and to challenge the ways these patterns disguise themselves as natural or inevitable. It is to reclaim our autonomy, to move from being puppets of our past to becoming conscious authors of our relational future. This is not merely about finding a better partner, it is about becoming a more whole, more aware, and more integrated version of ourselves, capable of giving and receiving love in ways that are truly nourishing and life-affirming. The path is not easy, it requires courage, commitment, and a willingness to confront the shadows. But the reward is the possibility of transforming our deepest relational wounds into sources of wisdom and strength, allowing us to finally step out of the recurring drama and into the authentic, evolving story of a love that is chosen, not compelled. It is the ultimate act of rewriting our own script, turning the fatal mistake into a profound opportunity for healing and liberation.